This is a fan-generated show. If you'd like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our new Rumble channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, Biden's calculated catastrophes. With us this evening and backed by popular demand, Daniel Greenfield, a Shillman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center and the editor/writer of the blog The Point at frontpagemag.com. Daniel, welcome back to the Glazov Gang.
Thank you. My pleasure to be back.
Thank you, Daniel. A lot of our fans, a lot of our viewers always writing to us about your hat. And now we're going to hear it like never before. Where's the hat tonight?
Well, I am sworn to secrecy, but I believe the hat has been, even as we speak, making its way to Afghanistan on a top secret mission. Now, the Taliban have their hats, they have their burqas, they have their headgear, and our hat, the American hat, is vastly superior, and we're going to prove that.
All right. Daniel, we've got to giggle a little bit and still celebrate life and celebrate the Lord and his creation, even in the darkest of times. And I think the darkest of times they are. Let's begin with the wonderful job that Biden is doing at the border. What do you make of it?
Oh, Biden pulled us out of Afghanistan, yet he won't actually use the military to protect our own borders. Instead, we're being invaded. We're being invaded en masse. I mean, we've been invaded for a while. The Biden administration unleashed a massive wave of illegal migrants just showing up at the border. But now we're seeing a tripling, a quadrupling. We're seeing sites and numbers that were previously inconceivable. The Biden administration and its media kept lying in the first months and saying, no, there's no increase in illegal migration. No, it's just seasonal. It's completely normal. AOC was saying, there's not, you're a racist if you think that there's some sort of increase in migration. Well, now you've got just an army there. So the Biden administration was actually abusing the FAA to try to ground drones, to try to prevent footage of coming out, because once you see this footage, you cannot gaslight people. You cannot tell people that this is not actually going on. You can't say to people, you're a racist if you notice this, because this is incredibly real. And we're seeing this massive, this is not even about people coming out of El Salvador. It's not people just coming from south of the border. You've got Haitians showing up here. You've got Haitians showing up in huge numbers at the border. This is obviously coordinated. It is obviously organized. It is obviously taking advantage of the corruption, the defeatism, the America Last policies of Joe Biden and of the Biden administration. And considering the convergence of crises that are taking place across America, around the world, this is really the exploitation of America's weakness. It's going for the underbelly.
Thank you so much, Daniel. So look, when we start unearthing Biden's policies, it just gets scarier and scarier. A lot of these Haitians are not even coming from Haiti right now. Many of them were in Mexico just waiting. And when Biden canceled all of Trump's policies, one of those policies included deportation policy. So the Haitians now know, in other words, that they can just come without getting deported. And of course, all these other ingredients of border policy. It's no coincidence that this is happening now with Biden and not with Trump, right? Because Trump was doing many things correctly, and Biden has canceled all of those policies out, which is an incentive and a come here sign to migrants, right?
Absolutely, you're completely correct, Jamie. So one of the big President Trump wins on immigration, on border policy, was the Remain in Mexico policy. Now, unfortunately, obviously, the wall never got built, but Remain in policy was a kind of virtual wall, because a lot of what's going on here, a lot of these guys are not just invading America, they're coming up, they're asking for asylum, and legally we have to, in theory, provide them with asylum, because back in the day, LBJ signed a UN Refugee Accord Treaty. So what President Trump's Remain in Mexico policy did, it was to say, these people are not even coming from Mexico. They're coming from third countries entirely. Like the Haitians are obviously an extreme example, but they're even more extreme examples. We've got Pakistanis, for example, showing up in Mexico and applying for asylum at the border. So Remain in Mexico policy said you have to apply in the first country you reach. You can't just show up in and go through 4, 5, 6 different countries. You can't just take a plane to Mexico or any other country and then show up at the border and say, okay, we want asylum. It's obviously a joke and makes the entire refugee system into a joke. So the Remain in Mexico policy was very crucial. The Biden administration, of course, threw out the Remain in Mexico policy. A number of states actually sued the Biden administration over it. The Supreme Court actually ruled in favor, which is really important because it forced the Biden administration to at least partially reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy. The big thing, though, is that when you have no Remain in Mexico policy, when you just allow anybody to show up, then pretty much anybody in the world has the motivation. Okay, all we have to do is make it to Mexico. If we make it to Mexico, we can actually just go up to the border, ask for asylum, and come in. And that's obviously a completely dysfunctional situation. Now, pile on top of that, the Biden administration dismantled a whole bunch of President Trump's common sense, sane immigration policies. One of the insane immigration policies was something called temporary protected status. Now, temporary protected status means, okay, let's say a country just had a major natural disaster. Maybe we shouldn't immediately deport people there to that country. Except the problem is the Democrats take something that's maybe merciful, it's common sense, and they, of course, completely abuse it and exploit it. So temporary protected status was supposed to be temporary. Under the Democrats, it stopped being temporary entirely. You had countries in temporary protected status for 20 years. You had Haiti has been in temporary protected status pretty much forever. President Trump actually began wrapping up some of the temporary protected status measures and saying, okay, your country had an earthquake 20 years ago. It doesn't mean that you can't have deportations now. That's insane. Yeah, and so Haiti is probably the worst example of TPS because Haiti is pretty much nonstop TPS. They've always either got an earthquake, they've got some sort of gang violence, they've got coups, they've got something going on. And when you have completely dysfunctional countries, they're in permanent TPS, which means you get basically a blank check. So President Trump tried wrapping that up. President Trump, Remain in Mexico policy was key for saying you can't just show up at the border and apply for asylum. Biden threw all of that out the window. This was a calculated move. And of course, all these guys immediately began showing up. They immediately began taking advantage of it. With that Remain in Mexico, you just take a plane trip, you make it to Mexico, you make it to the United States border, and boom, there's nothing we can do about it. TPS means if your country has some problems, if it's got some issues, you can just show up here and bet on TPS preventing you from being deported. So this is the kind of just a perfect storm that was created by Biden dismantling common sense immigration reform and enforcement policies from the Trump administration.
Thank you, Daniel. You know, I was a little bit offended by something you implied during your answer, saying something about the dysfunctional society of Haiti. You know, we have to remember that when any country in the world is not a success, it has nothing to do with the dysfunctionality of how it's running things. It's because of the imperialism and oppression coming from the United States, and add exploitation to that as well. That's my attempt at a sense of humor, but this is obviously the pathetic Marxist analysis of every...
I think you actually have a great point, Jamie, because really think about it. The more successful Haitians leave Haiti, they come to America. If we just actually ended immigration from Haiti, all these people who are a bit more successful, a bit more talented, might actually stay in Haiti. Maybe they'd actually fix the country. Probably not, but it's worth a try.
Right. Daniel, I'm really relieved. I was really worrying about the border crisis, but I was just so relieved that the Biden administration has made a very serious decision. I think everything's going to be okay now. They're not letting the Border Patrol people use horses anymore. So I think everything's going to get better, right?
Well, I think it's important to note that these are actually assault horses, which are horses that have reins on them. Regular horses, of course, are not assault horses. These are assault horses.
Right. And the thing is that it was completely untrue what the left was, just all these lies they were perpetrating. This is not the Border Patrol people on the horses whipping people. These are certain reins that are used for the horses, right?
Yeah, these are split reins, but the Biden administration, like the Obama administration, outsourced its policy, its think tank operations to leftist influencers on Twitter. When leftist influencers on Twitter say something stupid and manufacture a scandal, they immediately have to react to it. In the past, we had a process of electing political representatives who actually had some understanding, some knowledge of the world. Then we got Joe Biden, who barely knows how to use the bathroom. And his policy is think tank is whatever's trending on Twitter. And, when a few idiots on Twitter decided, hey, this picture kind of looks like he's whipping him, there we go. Now we have even less border enforcement than we did before, which is, quite an achievement considering we barely had any border enforcement already.
Oh boy, Daniel, I love Jen Psaki's press conferences, just the way she's answering those questions. She doesn't look like some kind of, just moronic teenager trying to get ready for a spelling bee or anything like that. Definitely doesn't look like that. Just very authoritative, a lot of expertise, and some of her answers, they're brilliant. I like the one about how the migrants coming across the border, they don't have to be tested for COVID. They're just checking them for symptoms. Oh, do you have any sniffles? Let me see if you have a fever. Okay, you can come through. I don't know what world she's talking about. Like in terms of the videos that we see, I don't know how they're checking these people for symptoms, number one, or what kind of symptoms they can find, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I guess it all doesn't matter because Psaki assures us that these people are not staying for a very long time.
I mean, they're not staying for a very long time, only long enough to have kids and get American citizenship through them. But really, it's all going to be completely fine. Sure, a number of local Democrat mayors and legislators have actually said that their communities, their cities, their towns have been infested with a variety of diseases. And we're not just talking COVID, though plenty of these guys have tested positive for that. They bring in all sorts of diseases, including measles outbreaks. But of course, again, that is perfectly fine. Bottom line here, though, is, immigration law doesn't apply to them. No actual laws apply to them. They don't seem to have to follow any laws. They can just march into the United States. So, why should any pandemic restrictions apply to them? I mean, laws are for Americans. They're for law-abiding citizens. These people are obviously not law-abiding in the first place. Otherwise, they wouldn't just show up at the border, try to cross it illegally, or demand to come in because, their country has too much gang violence.
Daniel, I'm not going to have a vaccine passport, but I'm going to try this. I'm going to go to the restaurant where they don't let people like me in. I'm just going to say, hey, don't worry, just let me in. I'm not really staying for a very long time.
It would help if you actually said this with an accent while indicating that you're undocumented. See, if you don't have a document, that's a problem. But if you're undocumented, well, that's your identity. They can't possibly discriminate against undocumented people. Undocumented people are victims.
Daniel, there's no naivete here. There's no idiocy here. The left is in power. The left hates the United States. Its greatest agenda is to destroy this beautiful, precious experiment on the planet of freedom, of individual liberty, of economic prosperity. They hate all that. And their goal is to destroy the United States, and they're doing a very good job at it, right?
Yeah, they absolutely do. Republican conservative administration, they go in and they spend months trying to figure out how can we get something done. The left is always doing something, whether or not it can actually achieve one of its big signature things, like the massive multi-trillion-dollar spending boondoggle. They're always doing something. They're constantly doing something. Every single agency under their control is doing something, and it's usually doing multiple things at the same time. So, of course, they're pushing tremendous demographic change. They've been doing this for decades now. They understand exactly how it works. They've been at this for generations as far as rewriting immigration policy goes. Then they convinced much of the country to discard really a lot of the basic premises of immigration. And now they just got people showing up in huge numbers at the border and just going through. And they're expecting Americans to get used to that. They're normalizing it. Now, if they can fundamentally transform Texas the way they transformed California, then they win. They know that. They're one state flip away from being able to control elections in the United States, from being able to create a one-party state. So, whatever happens with anything else, they know that they've got the long game right here in Texas, and it's no surprise that we're seeing this crisis in Texas.
Absolutely. We're going to go for a quick break with our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
Welcome to my artist studio where all the magic happens. This is the station for painting, and that is the station for all the resin art I do. If you want to check out my art, all you gotta do is go to LUTFstudio.com. Catastrophes.com. While you're there, make sure to use promo code GLAZOV. You will get yourself a wonderful discount, and generous portion of your purchase will be donated to Glazov Gang channel on YouTube, so the one and only wonderful Dr. Jamie Glazov can keep on fighting for our freedom.
And we are back with the genius and walking encyclopedia, Daniel Greenfield. Daniel, welcome back to the Glazov Gang.
Thank you, though I should correct you and note that it's currently the sitting encyclopedia.
It's what?
It's the sitting encyclopedia.
Absolutely, Daniel. Thank you so much. Daniel, before we went for a word from our sponsors, you were informing us of how the left is bringing in, of course, who knows who or what they're bringing in terms of unvetted migrants, in terms of many of these Afghans coming, Sharia supporters, believers in Sharia. We don't know how many jihadists are there. We don't know who's coming in through the southern border, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There can very much be another 9/11 type catastrophe / event / terrorist attack on our border, on our soil because of this, right?
Absolutely. The important thing to understand about the so-called airlift, the Biden administration, its people were patting themselves on the back for the Kabul airlift. Who do they actually bring to America? We actually just had 2 Afghans who were federally charged for committing crimes in Fort McCoy. One molested 2 underage teenagers. Another one was violently beating his wife, and he told her 9 women have already been killed at Fort McCoy. You will be the 10th. So we've got really horror stories already happening, and we just brought these people to America. Now, who are these people? That's a great question, because the Biden administration was handing out their visas, their special visas that were supposed to be for people who had worked for the United States. Almost none of those people actually got on those planes out of Kabul airport. About 1,800 of those that they brought, only about 1,800 of those were actually had the SIV visas. So who are the others? That is a really great question. Now, the thing to understand is that the Biden administration outsourced immigration policy in Kabul to the Taliban. The Taliban and their Haqqani network, which is really just another way of saying Al-Qaeda, controlled the checkpoints. To get through those checkpoints, the Taliban had to let you through. And seemingly, interestingly enough, and unsurprisingly, they let in very few of the people who actually had SIV visas. Who did they let in? Those are the people we actually brought in. Why did they let those people in? That is the very good question. So some of those people probably bribed the Taliban. It's human trafficking. It's not only the Mexican cartels that are engaged in human trafficking. Some of those people are likely family members of Taliban people. Some of them are probably Taliban people themselves. About 0.5% of them have been red flagged. Many of them because there were family ties to terrorism, which again suggests these people are linked to Taliban or Al-Qaeda. And a bunch of them probably are actual terrorists. Some of them probably under deep cover, who wait for a while, who set up cells in this country, who will then go on to carry on operations. I mean, we've brought in tens and tens of thousands of Afghans. We don't know who many of these people are. The Biden administration just actually flew them to the United States without properly understanding who they are. And they're going to cover this up. They're going to cover this up because the alternative is to admit that their conclusion of their disastrous retreat, their route from Afghanistan, was yet another supreme betrayal of our national security and an undermining of our future.
Not a very inspiring or cheerful situation. Daniel, there's reports as well. This is a Sharia environment that these Afghans are coming from. And so within Sharia, founded on Islamic law, there is polygamy. There is also child marriage. There are reports that many of these individuals that have come here, already we know that there's child marriage cases, there's polygamy cases. What do you make of that?
Well, Afghanistan has one of the highest child marriage rates in the world, I believe it's something like over 50%. So this is just routine. It's a normal way of life for them. We've had these reports, the 2 indictments in federal court now are really the first sign that this is going somewhere, but there are far more cases than this. Now, one of the outrageous, insane things is that while the United States obviously has very strict laws about abusing children, we actually pretty much recognize the marriages of anybody coming from across the United States, even if the marriage is underage. So over the years, we've had thousands of cases involving people coming from Muslim countries with underage brides, and we actually recognized that. We treated this as legitimate. Some cases we rejected where the age was just really horrifying, we're young, but the bottom line is these people are actually able to come to the United States to actually have their marriages treated legitimately. So we're aiding and abetting these really horrifying crimes. And, in Fort McCoy, a number of sources said that they suspected there was trafficking going on, that there were these older men with these really young girls. It's unclear if they were really even married to them at all, if they've actually been paid to bring them to this country. Either way, we're really aiding and abetting some of these worst crimes. Biden kept talking about how he's getting us out of Afghanistan. No, he's bringing Afghanistan to America. He's bringing the worst of Sharia law, of the abuses, of the abuse of young girls, of the abuse of women right into the United States. And these people right now are doing this stuff at Fort McCoy. They're going to be let out. They're parolees. They're going to be allowed to do this to American women, to American girls into this country. And that's really going to be even more horrifying.
I know that our producer, Annie Cyrus, this is an issue very close to her heart, of great concern to her. Annie, would you like to jump in here for a second?
Yes, I actually do have a question for you, Daniel. So you mentioned we are acknowledging their marriage even if the kid is underage. When I came to America 19 years ago, my paperwork was issued under a single girl, 18-year-old single girl. And when I asked, they said, what your father considered a marriage is not considered a marriage in America. So my question is, where did we go wrong in last 19 years to where now our administration is legitimizing a marriage of a child?
We know where we went wrong as far as some Democrat administrations go. It's also Republicans who really were not paying attention to basic things. I had an article on this, on the situation with child marriage being imported from countries that have Sharia law. There was actually, I believe it was Senator Johnson's office actually did a report breaking it down country by country. The majority of this was coming from Muslim countries, and there was really no interest in dealing with this. The report, I think, dated back to 2017, 2018. I don't believe anything was done about it. I don't believe any focus was actually maintained on this. And so it keeps going on and it keeps getting worse.
Thank you, Daniel. Daniel, let me jump around here to some other catastrophes going on, because wherever we look, I use the word catastrophe. I could use the word some kind of surreal, dark comedy, but everything is very Kafkaesque. Everything is very absurd. It's just seems like some kind of end times, to be honest with you, just some kind of dystopia going on everywhere we look. So let's just jump to this Biden-Boris Johnson meeting in the Oval Office the other day. They're sitting there with their black masks on. I'm surprised that they both don't have some Baphomet, picture with them, or some kind of representation of that or something. I don't know, just all very weird. And then they kicked Biden's people kicked out the press. Some kind of very strange scene. What did you make of that?
It's really bizarre because, in the past, this would be the kind of scene you'd have with the United States president actually answering questions, and it would be Russia or China or whatever, some totalitarian country, and they would say, no, we don't answer questions, and they would kick out the reporters. Now the roles are completely reversed, with the British prime minister saying, taking questions from reporters, and Biden's people kicking out all the American reporters. And then Psaki goes on there and says, Boris Johnson decided to take questions from reporters. Hopefully it's not going to endanger our relationship too much. It's completely insane that the guy who's sitting in the Oval Office, who worked so hard seemingly, or worked so little really, but spent so much money to get there, isn't doing basic things like taking questions from reporters. This is really, two world leaders have a meeting. They take some basic questions from reporters afterward. This is the way it's always been done. This is just standard operating procedure. And now you've got the Biden administration basically calling a lid constantly, refusing to let Biden actually interact. And Biden's going out there and saying, they're not letting me answer questions. And now you've actually got the press corps being kicked out. It's on the world stage. It's humiliating. It shows just how far America has fallen. It shows this is not a legitimate administration.
Yeah, and Jen Psaki, day after day, is defending this administration, quote unquote. I find that a very hard sight to watch for many reasons. It's so pathetic. And it looks like, she memorized A, B, C, D. Okay, I've got to get this right. This is also, because deep down she knows what she's defending. And it's just so obvious. But what do you make of Saki and that whole theater there?
To my mind, there's a kind of a crosscut between the whole Theranos trial, which is also going on in Elizabeth Holmes. And there's something similar about them. They're just kind of these youngish or women who try to be permanently young, who actually are little more than instruments in a kind of a cult. Their job is to defend, as you put it, the completely indefensible, using just word salads, hoping to gaslight people, to manipulate people, because they can't think for themselves. They're happy enough to be used as tools to perpetrate massive frauds. They're fronts for a corrupt operation. And, they just keep trying to pull off this scam that they have to know is going to fall apart. I mean, Theranos, the scam had to fall apart at some point. The administration, the scam has to fall apart at some point. I mean, Biden is moderately functional. At some point, the scam has to come apart. He's pretty old. They're talking about running him for a second term. I mean, this is in theory unworkable, yet they're just keeping the scam going from day to day. There's a kind of a Madoff quality to that, where you just keep pushing, you keep pushing, you keep pushing, and you don't think about what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't even think what's going to happen a month from now. Your job is to keep lying right now, and tomorrow you're going to tell another lie, and the day after that you're going to tell another lie. And you have to have really no conscience, no sense of continuity from day to day to day. You just have to exist in this moment and believe this lie that you're telling in this moment.
So in other words, you don't think these are very good people?
Well, I don't think any good people are qualified for jobs in the Biden administration.
Okay. Has Kamala disappeared? Did they hide her somewhere, or what's going on with that?
Yeah, they did hide her away, and it's absolutely brilliant because if you look at the latest Gallup poll, since they hid her, Biden hit his lowest numbers. I think about 53% now, actually, or 51% actually oppose him. But Kamala hit some of her best numbers. She's about even at 49 to 49%. So if they just actually keep Kamala hidden away in a basement for a few years, she might actually be a viable presidential candidate.
Daniel, very interesting also. It's come up in Congress now to continue the funding of Israel's Iron Dome. Surprise, surprise, the left has blocked that, I think maybe temporarily. I don't know how all the details work out there, but Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib led the way and have succeeded for the moment to have the funding for Israel's Iron Dome blocked, and those are the missile interceptors that Israel uses to shut down terror rockets launched from Gaza. What'd you make of that?
Oh, it's spectacular because they were pitching this originally as they're going to prevent the sale of arms to human rights violators. Now, never mind the fact that this is a lie, they're blocking Iron Dome. Iron Dome is a defensive system. It's a system that shoots down incoming rockets. The argument about blocking Iron Dome is you're pretty much advertising that you want Hamas to have the ability to kill Israelis. That's the only reason to block Iron Dome funding. And everything else they've done, they're twisting in the wind. They're trying to come up with arguments, but the only argument that they really can only legitimately make is we want Hamas to win. And that's the bottom line here.
Evil stuff. Also interesting, Daniel, how in our world, devils fight the devils. We know, for instance, Stalin going up against Hitler, and sometimes these demons end up fighting each other, which in some ways sometimes is good news. I was happy to hear that the New York BLM is now standing up against the racist, what they call the quote-unquote racist vaccine mandates. So that's actually an interesting development. So we've got a Marxist movement against also something that's quite Marxist. What do you make of that?
Well, I think New York is also a bit of an outlier. I think it was about a month and a half ago, I actually reported on a rally when the Presbyterian Hospital stated that everyone, all medical personnel, all employees had to get vaccinated. And there was a rally there. You had some people in Black Lives Matter gear there. Al Sharpton actually spoke at the rally. But again, I think New York is very much an outlier. We're not really, I think, going to see this much outside New York. Hank Newsom was the head of Black Lives Matter. New York is really also kind of an outlier within the organization of the umbrella group itself. The umbrella group itself is very much a captive of the conventional leftist establishment. Groups like the Ford Foundation, Soros, etc. BLM New York is kind of sometimes goes its own way, or Hank Newsom goes his own way in somewhat interesting ways. That said, we are seeing a drop in support for Biden among Black voters. It's particularly significant among unvaccinated Black voters. So it's definitely hurting him. I mean, really, Biden has got these two bases. He's got these kind of leftist, suburban, white women who are all the resistance. They were wearing the pink hats, and they were all doing the resist hashtags. And they're very much all in on the pandemic theater stuff, on everybody has to get vaccinated and wear masks or we're going to shoot you stuff. Whereas the Black base, the Black part of Biden's base, the other side of his base is actually less fond of a lot of the stuff. They're less comfortable with this. There is a reason Black people are less vaccinated than any other group. And it's because a significant portion of them are not all that happy with the idea for various reasons. So you've got these two parts of Biden's base that are somewhat colliding. It's not a huge collision at this point, but it's definitely an interesting phenomenon. As you put it, it's definitely worth watching.
Absolutely. And of course, just want to reemphasize sometimes when the left tries to exploit or distort something being said here. When I'm speaking about devils, it's just very clear that what I'm bringing up is Black Lives Matter, the Marxist organization. I'm not talking about many of the courageous Black people who, for very legitimate reasons, do not want a vaccine and are against vaccine mandates. Daniel Greenfield, thank you for joining the Glazov Gang this evening.
My pleasure. Thank you for all your activism and for a great conversation.
Thank you. Do you have very quickly final words of wisdom?
I think we actually should be steady. We should be courageous. We should be conscious of the fact that changes are coming and that as bad as the situation may look in some regards, God has amazing powers to change things in a moment.
Amen. Daniel, you should have maybe become a great preacher or a rabbi of some sort. Am I right?
I'm merely a humble sitting encyclopedia. I'm not at all qualified to do any of those things, but we all contribute in our own small ways.
Fantastic. Thank you, Daniel, for your courageous fight for the truth and for all your noble truth-telling.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you're visiting Daniel Greenfield every day at Front Page Magazine. He writes articles there, but he also has the blog The Point at that magazine as well. Check it out. And we'll see you soon on the Glazov Gang. Good night. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I recently got one of Mike Lindell's pillows and comforters at mybillow.com, and I started getting some of the most restful sleeps in my life. And you can do the same. Go to mypillow.com and use code GG21 to get incredible and amazing discounts. Or just call 1-800-854-0673. While you're doing that, you'll know that you're supporting Mike Lindell, a true American hero fighting a true American cause. And you'll also be supporting the Glazov Gang. Thank you. May God bless you, and may God bless America.